you for inviting me. I'm going to give a PowerPoint and talk a little bit about really the big picture of this approach for adolescents from a Montessori point of view. So if it's okay, I'll share my screen. Um, my inclination is really to talk about the purpose of what we do. Having been in this work for a while now, I feel like what I come up against most often in advocating for adolescents and adolescent education is just these conditioned responses we have, these entrenched way of thinking that what we're trying to do is produce academic performers, right? And somehow the ultimate goal is academic performance that's tested and graded, and somehow that's going to get our adolescents into some particular educational program that's going to ensure their value in the society and give them enough money for a job. And no matter how hard we work at talking about development of the human being, this is still the thinking that we are working to reshape, right? To change a little bit. Because really, ultimately, Montessori's goal was a more moral human being as the outcome. And to get to that point, we have to pay attention to the nature of development as it happens. And so one of the ways I often start a talk is by saying what Montessori is not, because there's a lot of misinformation. There are a lot of not so great perceptions about what Montessori education is, and it's commercialized these days in a way that takes us away from focusing on development of human beings towards that moral outcome. So it's not a program for gifted students, which some people think it is, because all children have gifts. And part of our job is to help those children and adolescents understand what their gifts are as humans and as individuals. It's not a program for neurodivergent students who need a particular kind of support. We accept diversity in Montessori. We accept neurodivergence in all of us. We all have different ways of thinking. It's not a religious education, even though Montessori herself writes about her own Christian beliefs. It is not per se a particular religious approach. It is a spiritual approach, and there's openness to consideration of religious education and different practices in spirituality. It's not a curriculum. And I would say that is the number one misnomer, that somehow people think we can offer them a curriculum. Just give me the lesson plans. Just give me the curriculum plan so we can have an academic, right, outcome, maybe in a kinder way, right? So help us, Montessori, to be loving and kind and also produce academic performance. And yet that's not what Montessori is about either. It's not the materials. It's not a set of manipulatives that are going to help in some way. Although there are materials in Montessori, not so much for adolescents, and they can be an aid to a child understanding sensorially what also becomes an abstraction. But that's not at the heart of what Montessori is either. It's certainly not a cult, although we are accused of being that at times. And it's not a project-based learning approach. Even though when we talk about adolescence, we are going to talk about purposeful work and tasks that are serving your community. So we might look at them as projects, those tasks, but it's also different from packaged project-based learning that happens in conventional settings. So it's not these things, although there are threads of them, right, in Montessori. What Montessori really is a lens. It's a lens that we look through with informed eyes on the development of children and adolescents in order to support what they need and what they're capable of. So understanding human development is our prime directive in order to support the natural development of human beings, because there's an incredible amount of potential in human beings. And that's what Dr. Montessori saw. She saw the revealing, right, the revelation of the natural potential in children, and realized that a lot of what education does gets in the way, becomes an obstacle, is an attempt to control children for adult purposes, rather than recognizing what internally the gifts we have as human beings and how to support the full unfolding of those gifts in childhood and adolescence. So an informed lens, that's primarily what our job is as educators. I also find Montessori a deeply respectful approach to human beings and a spiritual perspective on what it means to be human. Montessori recognized that the drive to develop and become human happens internally. It's not something that's imposed from the outside. It's not something adults make happen. It happens because we're human, and as humans, we have real value on the planet. We have the potential to become our best selves, which is both strong individuals and strongly collaborative, interdependent groups, understanding that we have mutual needs on the earth. We have fundamental needs that we all share. And having compassion and gratitude and understanding of how we're all connected, right, means we could be a much more moral and ethical group of humans on the planet. She saw that as the potential natural outcome and believed that if we could support that unfolding in children and adolescents, the outcome would better society for the rest of us. And I like to emphasize this aspect of Montessori because understanding that we are looking at the development of an individual with strength and agency, and as the videos talked about, right, differential learning, support for the individual. But in order to operate in what is essentially an interdependent system on the planet, the Montessori perspective, those of you who know about the second plane in Montessori, where Montessori talks about cosmic education, well, she talked about cosmic harmony in the universe, that we are all connected on the planet, all living organisms, and our interdependency includes non-living entities. There is a grand interrelated connection between all of us. And our gift as human beings is particularly one of being able to adapt, right? Adaptability is the gift that we have. Other creatures have it too, but we have it in pretty powerful ways. And we have the ability to modify our environment and adapt it for our needs. So our contribution is one of understanding this interrelatedness, this interdependency, and understanding what Montessori calls mutual exchange. We exist, we thrive because there is a mutual exchange among all of the cosmic agents, right, on the planet and in the universe. And the moment we forget that we are part of that interdependency and part of that mutual exchange, we are in a position of damaging it and ourselves. And we could argue that that is happening around us in our time. And so understanding the strength of the individual and the strength of our interdependency is an important part of our Montessori lens. She saw and she understood that the role of education would be to support the development of children and adolescents in recognizing their potential, and that it manifests differently at different stages of development, right? So she talks about the planes of development. and how we should recognize that each stage of development will require different supports for different characteristics and different kinds of environments. This is a science. Understanding how humans develop and the environmental interactions they have is a scientific approach that we use observation, right, to respond to and to help support. So this idea that we help to prepare the environment, and I know perhaps all of you already know this already. I don't really know what the collective background is, but even after the number of years that I have practiced in Montessori, it took me a long time to understand why independence is so important. And it's not independence in that I don't need you, I can do things separately from you. It's independence in the individual's ability to master the environment themselves, to know that they have agency, they have choice, right? That their needs are heard and responded to, and they can learn to be capable themselves, not dependent on the adults. That's important because subservience is not what we're aiming for. We're aiming for individual strength, individual freedom of expression and choice. So that young child asks, help me to do it myself. Help me master my own environment, because we develop by interacting with the environment, not by having someone do things for us, but by allowing us to interact to meet our own needs. And that 6 to 12-year-old who says, help me think for myself, help me figure this out. I have a brain, I have logic, I have reason. I want to figure out how things are related, how things work, how the universe works. And that 6 to 12-year-old, full of wonder, full of interest and curiosity about how the universe works. They don't need to be told how everything works. They need to be invited to discover how things work in the universe. And that adolescent whose prime directive is to belong to a group, make a contribution, and serve their group, serve their community, meeting its needs, is asking, help us to do it ourselves and make a contribution that's real, that's purposeful, that has concrete impact. And the outcomes that Montessori felt would occur if we can support this development, first of all, is simply our adaptability to be fully developed as a species. And within that, to be independent and interdependent on one another. And the result of which would be a stronger moral awareness of how we interact on the planet and what we're responsible for in being citizens of humanity and citizens of the planet. So what does this look like for adolescents? Well, you had a couple really good videos before to get a glance of what this looks like. What Montessori was able to observe, and what we observe of adolescents, is that, first of all, they start out very awkward in adolescence. They are vulnerable. They are changing so quickly. And they have a lot to develop and identify in these years between the ages of 12 and 18. Montessori called them the social newborn. They're like a newborn baby, except they're new into a social context. They're working towards adulthood. So they are the emerging adult. They're new at this, and they're very awkward at it. And they have to have lots of experience themselves in order to develop their capacities toward adulthood. They have lots of change going on in the brain, in the body, in social experiences. And because of all of that, like the newborn, they have some vulnerabilities in health. They need a lot of sleep, and they need some protection. Montessori talks about the two major needs of the adolescent are, number one, to be protected in a time of vulnerability. Now, that doesn't mean coddled. That doesn't mean we do things for them. What it means is that we understand what it is their bodies and their brains are going through, and we provide the appropriate challenge and environment to support them meeting those challenges. Sometimes I think as practitioners who work with adolescents, we get caught up in wanting to take care of them, wanting to be there for them, wanting to help them. It is a time of vulnerability, but they don't need that, right? They need opportunities to take risks, try things, fail, learn from their failures, learn from their experiences. And so what we're protecting is those opportunities. They do experience some emotional turbulence because one of their strong needs right now is to form relationships with people, to learn how to work with other people who may disagree with them, right? Who may have different perspectives and ideas. That can be painful at times, but it's absolutely necessary to become a more collectively collaborative human being. Montessori describes this time as a state of expectation. They are expecting to become something, and they don't quite know what it is yet. And so they're in a creative time period, and yet they've got to do a lot of experimenting, right? In order for that creation of self to begin to shape an understanding of who they are and what their capabilities are. There's a lot of brain development that happens in adolescence. We get the proliferation of new dendrites, and we get some pruning of those dendrites. So neural pathways are being laid during this time at a rate greater than any other time in life except early childhood, right? Toddlerhood outstrips the adolescent, but still there's a great deal of brain development happening. And so there's going to be some misfiring. There's going to be some risk-taking, some bad judgments, an inability at times to connect the consequences of what they've done to their original thoughts or plans. And we have to recognize this is normal development. This needs to happen in order for them to strengthen new neural pathways. Montessori calls us a time of creative tendencies. They are creating a self, they're creating relationship, they're creating identity, they're creating new ways of thinking. That requires lots of activity, energy, that's going to exhaust them at times. They're also fatigued regularly. They will need expressions of creative opportunities. They engage in areas of self-expression like art and music and drama and physical activity, which is important for them at this time of life. Yes, there's risk-taking. The brain requires that they take risks. And we could talk about that a lot, but the brain is actually wired for adolescents to experiment with new things. And they need to do that for us because they're willing to take risks on new ideas and new approaches that adults, have backed away from because we have old ways of thinking. So risk-taking is part of being an adolescent. So how can we give them maximum opportunity for risk-taking and still boundaries that are safe? So how do we respond to these needs that occur at this time of life? Protection means appropriate support and challenge. We don't back down from offering challenge or the sophistication of what they might do. We feed their interests with challenges that stretch them, that they want to reach for, and they will when the work is meaningful to them and they've had some agency in the work. Montessori says, treat them with more respect than they deserve, because the outward behavior you may see in adolescence may make you think they're not ever going to be mature adults. They frustrate us sometimes, they amuse us sometimes, they scare us sometimes. And yet what they need from us is a recognition of their nobility, of the best human being they are going to be. They need us to respect the best that they are and believe in them, not criticize, not judge, support, process, sometimes challenge. They need opportunities to belong to the group and to contribute to the group, because they need to experience what Montessori says is their task right now. Their developmental task in adolescence is to gain independence socially. How can I function in a social group and do that well and be aware of other people and be aware of myself and still navigate the challenges of social experience? And how can I experience the way human beings organize themselves in this world, which is we have an economic interdependence. Now, this is not about money and making money. This is about recognizing that everyone makes contributions to our lives. Everything we eat, we wear, the infrastructure of our lives is available to us because people make contributions in order for us to have what Montessori calls the supernature, right, of our time. Experiencing that contribution and the interdependence of people who are gifting us with their contributions is very important for adolescents to understand and feel they themselves can make their own contribution now, while they are adolescents, and in the future when they are adults. It's not about which job they're going to have, which career they're going to have. Montessori will say it's about experiencing that they can make a contribution. They can belong and serve others with what they do and appreciate that others offer gifts to them. It still involves work of the heads and the hand, because creating and solving problems and contributing to the community requires that we design, we build, we grow things, we manage our space where we live together, work together, study together, where this community exists together is a physical and an intellectual process. We integrate those things. They need to experience that they can succeed in their own efforts by making mistakes first and express what they're thinking, what their ideas are, what their perspective is, what their challenges are. They need a lot of processing during this time. And so opportunities for self-expression should be a part of every aspect of their lives in this community. They should have the freedom to express what they're needing and what they're thinking, and listen to the self-expression, take in the self-expression of other members of the community. And finally, I just want to say Montessori really focuses on this notion that as a species, what we do as human beings is we organize ourselves to get things done. We have a social organization. We collaborate together to get things done. Adolescents need to experience that in a real, authentic way. And often conventional education does not invite them to do that. Conventionally, there's a lot of passive learning, right, in schools. And yet this is the number one human mechanism, social organization, that Montessori says is the catalyst for development into adulthood. They must concretely experience how we work together, organize ourselves to meet our needs and to get things done. That is the work that adults do. And so the kind of work adolescents needs to be adult work that they can participate in and make a contribution to. So whenever we talk about what happens in the prepared environment for adolescents, we always talk about the integration of study and work. Work is getting the things done. Work is organizing and making it happen and building it and constructing it and solving the problem, and knowledge contributes to that work. We're not denying the value of knowledge. We're saying that knowledge is powerful when there's purpose for it. And as the video said, right, it's applied knowledge that they really respond to. They will tell you that. When the knowledge has a meaningful purpose for them, they're quite willing and able to give maximum effort to engaging knowledge and engaging skill in order to do the work that they feel invested in, that they've been invited into by the adults as important for their community. And so study and work together, integrated, relevant, and with concrete impact. They need to be able to see, hear, experience the results of their work. They're still in a stage of development. They are not adults yet. They are building neural pathways. So being able to concretely experience the impact of their work is important developmentally, which is why Montessori suggests this environment that has these elements that drive everybody crazy a little bit, like why a farm, or why a shop, why are they running businesses, why are they making things? It's because they need to experience life and the problems they're solving and the needs that they're meeting in a concrete way. And this is not what it looks like. This is typical of a middle school classroom in our culture. And this is not what Montessori is talking about. This is not social organization. This is not concrete impact, right? And so what we're challenged with in setting up environments for adolescents is how many different ways can we invite them into purposeful work of a community that's running itself, that's running its operations, that's providing food and infrastructure and taking care of each other and taking care of the land that they have and being stewards of the natural resources they have access to. Whether it's urban, rural, suburban, you are still in a physical environment that has a geography, has landscape, has soil, has water, has use of energy, impacts its region, impacts the environment and the people in the environment. All of those create this reality for a community to be responsible for running itself, operating its needs, solving its problems, and engaging in the practical and intellectual work that requires. And so the challenge is to really push the envelope wherever we are and create these opportunities for purposeful work that meets human needs. So Montessori suggests these 3 platforms that farm or work on the land, and particularly raising some of your own food, right? Learning our relationship with the planet in terms of how the planet feeds us, takes care of us, gives us natural resources to build our infrastructure with. Understanding that in a practical and intellectual way, in a way that your senses can take in, so that you feel you have a relationship with the planet that's not completely abstract, that has concrete connection to it. And learning that food is a really central experience for adolescents, right? They need food. They respond to food. Food is at the center of life. And so you can do a great deal around the production, the cooking, the serving of food, the selling of food items, the analysis of where our food comes from, food waste, food deserts. Food is very central and can happen as a central source of study and work, no matter where you are. but also the resources of water, right? And soil and and energy and how we manage those resources to run our communities. And so this is a chart of potential areas of focus that an adolescent program can have: a kitchen, a shop, being engaged in producing and exchanging items and selling items in order to understand that economic system of interdependence that we rely on. To be able to create things with your hands, like in a wood shop or a workshop, or textiles, or baskets, or honey, right? So many different ways that adolescents can experience the production of items that serve others, and they can sell and be a part of an economic system. Growing plants, whether that's on a farm or it's in a greenhouse or it's in a grow center or it's in urban gardens where the parking lot has been turned over and turned into organic growing frames, which many of our adolescent programs in urban situations are doing. On the rooftops of Tokyo, Japan, or in Taiwan. Yes, in urban centers. And we have this idea in the United States, which is helpful, which is called urban farming, right? To take unused land and turn it over and create food access to people who don't have local food access. To raise animals, whether that means the big ones like the cows you saw in the video, or it's chickens or bees, things that can be also raised in urban settings. To know where your water comes from, how it's treated, to monitor your water use, your energy use, to experiment with alternative energy uses. Some of our urban programs are working with bike shops where they are helping to repair people's bicycles because bikes are a great alternative to fossil fuel vehicles, right? Any kind of craft production, kitchen work, right? All of that is hands-on, concrete, and important work for the adolescent community, as well as figuring out your community governance, how you're going to behave with each other, what codes of expectation, what are your community agreements about how to treat each other, who's responsible for what, how you rotate through responsibilities. Montessori's phrase she uses is this should be a school of experience in the elements of social life, real social life being that we live together in communities and we take care of each other. So these are just some of the aspects of that are natural outcomes when you are able to offer this kind of interrelated work, division of labor, caring for self, others, and the environment. That's a thread that goes all the way through Montessori, from 0 to 3, all the way through adolescence. How do we care for ourselves, others, and our environment? To be engaged in production and exchange, to experience that, to provide food and all the aspects of food, construct and maintain your physical infrastructure. You can build things, design like the chicken coop, but also compost bins and small structures, and really anything that can be built and designed for the community's needs, greenhouses, how you maintain your natural resources, how you share culturally, how you tell your stories to others, how you hear and share the stories of all the members of your community and their heritage and what they bring with them. That's an important part of being a community that takes care of itself, how you govern yourselves, how you are going to conduct intellectual engagement and study, and sharing culture through the arts, listening to the human experience from the past, from other cultures, all voices counting, right? All voices having valuable stories to tell. And often people then will ask me, okay, all this great hands-on work, community work, where is knowledge? And as I said before, you need knowledge to make any of these things work effectively. Of course, we need to learn about chemistry of food preservation and the physics of designing and building structures and the history of peoples and their contributions to the human experience. this is a word art piece of all of the discipline knowledge Montessori herself lists in her educational syllabus. And her point is not that we should cover all of this, we could in any way, but that all of it should be accessible, as needed, as relevant, that it's all rich human gifts to us. And so if the task, which it always does, requires knowledge, there's incentive to gain that knowledge, and not just what would be offered to a 7th-year student or a 9th-year student, but the sophisticated knowledge that they're capable of taking on and will want to take on in order to do their task well. So we shouldn't artificially limit the knowledge we bring them either, right? Because they will be capable of more sophisticated work when the conditions call for it. So relevant to the task and without artificial limits. The sky's the limit in exposing them to human knowledge. So just a couple of suggestions. We want to include the adolescents in considering what the work of the community should be. And one of the ways we might do that is just to keep exploring your own community and the space that you are in, whether that's a building on a block in the city or a neighborhood or a suburban area, and what land you're near, and what responsibilities do you have as a community to take care of, and ask them, what work should we do? And I just want to make this one little point. I do think we tend to, even in our Montessori communities, focus more on, oh, what does the individual want to do? What are they interested in? Of course, we're always listening to that. But I think Montessori's message for us, for adolescents, is more about what work should we do? What are we responsible for in our community? And how can we maintain that, sustain that, and work towards serving others in doing that? We kind of forget sometimes that the ultimate outcome is responsibility to one another. So continuing to bring the adolescent into that, to bring the adolescent into helping to plan what the work and study might be throughout the course of our year, because we're responsible for ourselves, for others, and for the environment. So we realize that in order to develop, the individual needs to display effort, to exercise himself, and not be dependent on others. Now, this independence is acquired by one's own effort. It is evident that this is a formation, a growth. Therefore, only acquired by long experience, it is the valorization of the personality to become aware of one's own value. Without this, as many psychologists say, the child only feels his own value if he is loved. There is another valorization. He is independent. He is sure of his own actions and knows how to act. This is the basis and law on which the soul must stand. So independence is strength. Independence is confidence, it's mastery, it's agency in the context of our responsibility to be interdependent with other human beings. Okay, that's a lot in a short amount of time. I'm not sure whether we're doing questions.
Yes. If anybody has any questions, thank you, Laurie, for such a great informative session. If anybody has questions, I do not see any questions right now in the chat. So we'll just give them a minute to type it in if they are going to. So, Laurie, while people type in, maybe I can start with the first question. Is that okay?
Yes, yes.
Yes. So a lot of the schools over here are aspiring to be Montessori schools and to open and are looking at adolescent programs. So what are the challenges for school in establishing an adolescent program? specifically, the things that can go wrong. Other than, we hear that finance is an issue, land, beyond just that, what are some of the things that can be gotchas or something to watch out for as schools consider exploring this option?
Well, the real challenge is building up enough of a social group with enough purposeful work that other things aren't the distraction, right? My experience is that if you've got real work for them to do, they are more inclined to be productive and to be engaged in the study that's going to help with that work. And I think, by necessity, we often start out very small in small communities, and that's okay, but you have to have an aim to grow large enough so that the group has enough social diversity for the adolescent and enough opportunity to do a variety of work, because it doesn't help to have everybody doing the same thing, right? And when you have a small group, it's harder to then have varied purposeful work that you want ultimately to have. The other challenge is, until you have a culture of responsibility set, that we do take care of ourselves, others, and the environment, the adults become the oldest children, right? So you have to have adults be what we call the ninth year student, the oldest student, to model the interactions, the dedication, the seriousness of the work. Once that gets set into the culture, and it does, because I've watched it happen among different sized groups, urban, rural, public sector, private. Once it's established, it runs itself. The culture brings the new adolescents in because they do want to belong and make a contribution. So there's some serious modeling that has to happen without too much dominance, right, by adults at the beginning. And that's kind of a fine-tuned art to make that happen. I think you just have to convince your parents too. What you have to do is build the excitement around those purposeful work opportunities. Then what we do is we back map. We document the knowledge that was gained, the skills that were introduced and learned in order to do this work, to show parents that we are going to have well-informed, capable adolescents. But we're going to get there differently, and we're going to get there in partnership with the adolescent.
Yes. So, thank you for that response. I have a couple of questions that are coming in right now. The one of our members is asking, what are your thoughts on a hybrid Montessori adolescent program? It seems that the programs that are in the rural setting is best, and I'm not sure how much our families and communities would be down for boarding school. So.
So what we always say is that you want to work toward providing the maximum opportunities you can wherever you are. There are ways to offer the experience of living together and taking care of each other in different situations for shorter periods of time. And not by going to hotels and visiting and being a tourist, but by actually finding times where the adolescents can be together. Sometimes these are considered odyssey trips. They might be canoe trips or bike trips, but any experience where they are responsible for themselves, for the cooking, for the organizing, for setting up the structure of the experience, and then for serving each other in a rotating way. A lot of maturity can happen, a lot of transformation can happen in short periods of time where the conditions are truly calling on them to be authentic social beings. Wherever you are, suburb or city, you're still in a space where resources are being used. So I started in a suburban setting. I have colleagues and family members who've started urban programs. And you just have to think outside the box and remember that you're still using water, you're still using energy, you still have interactions with land and environment and waste systems and you're building. right? And maintaining your own building and understanding how that environment works, you can hand that over to adolescents. Two public schools, one in Denver and one in Golden, Colorado, both were doing the cooking for the school, right? Which was a public school district food system. And they were doing the food and cooking and the menus and taking care of that. You have to work hard at pushing the envelope in systems that have already been set up so the adolescents can take over and make contributions and own those systems.
Sounds good. One other thing that one of our members is asking is, in order to run a boarding school, you need to have a very trusted and vetted members of the community running it. So, and I want to add to that question, what are the characteristics of an adult that you need to look as a school when you're hiring an adult, and how do you support them in their growth? Is there any practices that you would recommend?
In general, we're looking for adults. We like to use the term Renaissance people. You have to be someone who's interested in lifelong learning, because you don't have to know everything in order to come work in partnership with adolescents, but you have to be willing to learn anything that comes up that you may not know. And you have to be humble in that process and willing to say, I don't know. Let's go find out. Let's do this together. Let's find a specialist who can help teach us this skill that we don't have, this knowledge that we don't have. And so you do need adults, not adults who are already entrenched in their own content knowledge, but adults who are willing to expand their own knowledge alongside the adolescents to serve their community. That's a really important thing. And as a person coming into this kind of environment, you have to be willing to do lots of different things. So I've had people who are naturalists, but also knew how to do watercolor painting. So guess what? That's both going to be available to adolescents. And so to expand your own horizons, that's really important. Also, for me, the number one quality is that you don't have too big of an ego. It can't be about you as the adult. It has to be about your being able to step back and support the adolescent's independence. That's really important. If you're talking about boarding and trusting people, they need to be able to live in intentional community and be okay with that. And I'm just going to make this suggestion. You need to have some way of doing a check with a counselor or someone who can do kind of a screening. You do want to make sure that you don't have adults coming in that have dysfunctions that you're not picking up on in an interview. And so part of the process needs to be some kind of a screening for healthy, functioning adults.
Okay, my next question our members are asking is that if you're running a very small traditional upper school who is trying to integrate Montessori principles, what are the elements that they can implement quickly? I guess maybe they want to slowly transition into an adolescent community, maybe from that perspective as well. Maybe you could shed some light on that.
So I'm not sure whether we're talking about high school, like middle school, 12 to 15 or 15 to 18. But in either case, you start introducing, instead of the required curriculum or the prescribed curriculum or the curriculum you have planned already, you bring in a purposeful project that the students have been part of identifying. You ask them, what do we need to be taking care of, right? To be better stewards of our environment and each other. And so you go through the process of doing this in partnership with them and putting their ideas at the center and helping them to combine that practical work and that study. And you break the cycle of having everything planned by the adults in advance. Do it here and there. make it happen in one part of the first semester and one part of the second semester, and just see the engagement level. And you're going to want to shift when you see how it changes the way the adolescents themselves interact with the work.
Very interesting. I do have a couple of two more questions that are here. Thank you for the insights, Laurie. Are there divisions between the 12 to 18 in the various areas of work, or is it only during the academic work?
John Buzzard's coming after me, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about that, because the two levels exist at Hershey, where I no longer am, but he is. But I would say in general that it's all one plane. Montessori will say developmentally they have more in common than there are differences. And so they can exist in the same community, but their roles are going to shift, because that older adolescent is beginning to have capacities the younger adolescent is still forming. And they're going to want to do work that is closer to adult level work. If you're running businesses that the younger students are making things for and selling, that older adolescent wants to do the accounting or the marketing, right? Or they can be the person who takes those items to the festival, to the vendor, and can run it without an adult being there. So suddenly you have a workforce that's got greater intellectual capacity and also a different kind of ownership of the work at a different level. They will be more interested in what specialists can bring them in the way of knowledge. The knowledge that they can attain is at a higher, more advanced level, and they're going to want to find out what knowledge they can bring in. So you have to allow for a greater level of capacity, but you don't have to separate them completely. And they're still going to work most for, yes, what they are interested in doing and becoming, and what the community needs beyond them. So now they're also concerned about the issues outside the school, in your region, your national, your global issues. What's relevant to them is broader than what's relevant to the younger adolescent. And so we need to be able to allow them to address those issues beyond the school, knowing the school's part of a global view. It's not separate, it's just greater and greater concentric circles.
Thank you for the beautiful answer. Last question, Laurie. Very insightful presentation. I'm currently finishing my adolescence training with Tina Booth from Train Montessori, and we've been enjoying your NAMTA articles. In our class, we often discuss spiritual development, and I'm curious to know, how does spiritual development manifest in the third plane of development? If we approach this from a religious perspective, what would be the most effective way to infuse it within the educational syllabus?
Well, I think I'll need days to think about that one. It's a big topic. I mean, when I think of spiritual development from a Montessori point of view, she taught for Montessori spirit, the spiritual embryo of the child, the spiritual aspect of the person. And she talks about she uses the word soul.
Still talking.
Is that the individuals drive to become their fully realized self, their full potential, comes from inside. And we're born with that trajectory and that drive. And that says something about the human being as a spiritual being. And we need to respect and support that and not expect it to be imposed. The adolescent, however, is very interested in spiritual and religious practices. And so they're interested in their own heritage in that way, the way that they were raised. And they might walk away from that a little bit, because their job is also to test how they were raised. Often they will come back to it later on, but they are interested in how religion and spirituality is practiced. There's a sensitive period for philosophy at this time. So they will want to study. They will want to understand different religious perspectives and practices. And I don't think we should shy away from introducing them to a variety of religions and beliefs. And what they'll find, I think, is there's something universal and something common with many, many spiritual practices that says something about us as humans. And they'll also discover for themselves the value of the way that they've been raised and the practices that are in their own community. So just remember, I think it's a time of exploration. And those who are free to explore will generally come back with a greater commitment to their own spiritual practice. That's my experience.
Thank you so much. I don't see any other questions, so I would like to thank you for giving us your precious time to come and talk to us and enlighten with your knowledge. And we hope to have you in the future again.